us, two unfiltered mums here to share the raw reality of parenthood, and you're listening back with Kelly and Laura. Now, on today's episode, we are going to be talking about co-parenting.
And we are very lucky that we are joined by a special guest with us today. And I've known this guest for 32 years. It is my older brother, Liam. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So do you want to start by just giving everyone a bit of an idea of your setup?
Yeah, so I have two children, two boys, are now 10 and 7, from a split relationship, co-parenting, however you want to dress it up, really. And on top of that, I work full time. And yeah, that's kind of the setup, really. Simple as that.
Perfect. So how did it come about then, the aspect of sort of co-parenting and deciding, the relationship's ending and co-parenting was the way forward?
I think it's one of those. I think the relationship obviously came to an end for whatever reason, and then you're sort of thrust into this position where you have no alternative but to get on with it as best as you can. So to ask the question, how did it come about? It's more that the reality of it, I suppose, is that it's just overnight, really. Boom, here you go. You're now on your own, but trying to work alongside obviously a previous partner. So, yeah.
And in regards to co-parenting, was it something that you could organise between yourselves, or did it end up going a more official route?
Yeah, so we eventually went through the court system, essentially to sort of finalise everything, really, and have an agreement put in place whereby, I suppose to a degree, it was legally binding. The reality of the court agreement was that it actually gave us then a platform to discuss how best to arrange the the upbringing of our kids together as best as possible, really, and that really, before the court procedure, was what we were lacking. I think it was obviously a difficult period anyway. But I think what that court, I'd say, court sort of gave us that platform, I suppose, to be able to then look to discuss a more suitable arrangement between ourselves, really.
So what was the process, sort of like the stepping stones to get to court? Because I know court's the final sort of step, if you like. What were the stepping stones before that?
Yeah, so essentially, so for anyone out there who's about to go through or is going through this process, it's a bit of a minefield, really. So the first stage really is always going to be mediation. It is literally what it says on the tin. You sit in a room with a mediator, and then they will essentially look to get you to talk. I think there's only certain circumstances that can be bypassed, and it's in and around sort of the world of domestic violence, or if there's been any abuse throughout the relationship, which means that you can't be put in the same room together, really. Mediation is completely what's the word I'm looking for? Voluntary is the word I'm looking for. So if and there's a reason for that. It's they don't want to be mandating people into mediation. It's an entirely voluntary process. However, the further processes can't happen until mediation has at least been attempted. So I think with us, we attempted mediation twice. And then for whatever reason it didn't work, That's when sort of you're literally given a piece of paper which goes, here you go, you've tried mediation, it didn't work, so you can now continue through the court process, I suppose. And then it just sort of goes on from there, really. So you then move into like the realms of do you want a solicitor? If you're going to have a solicitor, like you'll have meetings and consultations with them where they'll sort of sit down and go through everything with you. You then have to go through a period, essentially a screening process, and both parties will have to do it from a they're called CAFCAS, which is essentially safeguarding.
Right.
So they will basically ask you questions around: do you have any concerns? Do you have any concerns around with the kids being around the other parent? There's any issues like drugs, alcohol, mental health, all that sort of thing. Really, so they look to basically tick off all the boxes. What then will happen? It's a stage after that. CAFCAS compile a report on both parents to then basically hand it to the court. You're essentially then given a court date, and then you basically go in and converse around, what both parties are looking for, really.
Gosh, it's a process, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a short process. So this all happened for me during COVID. So actually, relatively quick. I think it took between like 6 and 9 months. But
is that quick? Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
So and that was with hold-ups as well. So we did have hold-ups. But yeah, so the whole process is a bit of a minefield, and it's one of those you almost have to constantly remind yourself why you're doing it, because it's so easy to become very quickly dejected with the whole system. And I mean, now we're sort of out of COVID. I imagine that there's been a substantial amount of breakdowns in relationships because of obviously that lockdown period. I can imagine you're probably now finding that the courts are sort of backdated as well, so that's only going to extend that sort of longevity, I suppose.
So, gosh, can I ask a question in regards to the situation? Was there any point that you felt a sense of inequality as a man? Because I do hear that sometimes the woman can be favoured in situations like this, especially when it goes down that legal process to court. Was there ever a point where you felt there was some imbalance there?
I think in general, no. I think particularly so if we take like that final piece of the puzzle, like the court procedure, I actually think that you're both sort of supported almost like a 50-50 level, really.
Okay.
And I actually found it to be like quite refreshing, because I think as you've alluded to, it's I think historically it certainly has sort of favoured the female party over the male party, and for whatever reason that is. I did find that through the sort of safeguarding procedure quite interesting, should we say, in the sense that so you're when you're going through the safeguarding issues, it's literally done. Well, mine was done over the phone. I don't know whether that's through because of COVID or whether that's do it. But what I found quite interesting was I felt that I was treated quite abruptly and almost like second class throughout, until they've sort of come to a question where they've asked me what my occupation was. When I've explained, that I'm, for want of a better word, a civil servant, the whole dynamic of the conversation changed, and it almost felt like this sort of cloak had been lifted, and actually, he might actually be all right then. So yeah, and all of a sudden it was, oh, thank you very much for your time, Miss Hopkins, and so yeah, it was quite. It was that for me was quite an intense sort of hour or so, whereby I'd raised no safeguarding concerns, and it just sort of felt like I was a bit, second class citizens, probably the best way to put it. So yeah.
It's just crazy. I think that was how you were treated from the off, like before they knew anything. That was just their default, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, it's mad.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I can't sort of sit here and try to second guess, how many sort of court procedures are ongoing whereby it's the dad who's sort of leading it rather than the mum, or it's the mum leading it with the dad sort of dragging their feet. But I just think that each case has to be treated on its own merit. And I think this sort of, it almost felt like an unconscious bias was sort of was involved from the minute that I was spoken to, until, as I said, once we started getting into the root of what you do with your life day to day, it sort of seemed to calm down and relax off a little bit, really. So yeah.
That's crazy, isn't it?
I know, that it makes me a little bit mad, I must say. So being as we're talking about sort of the legality side of it, I'm gonna just ask a question about finances in relation to, legally you're obviously obliged, am I right, in so much a month child support. Is that sort of decided in court? Is that something you decided out of court and it was just agreed? How does that work?
Yeah, so the whole world of I can't remember if it's still called CSA, it was child support arrangement, is an interesting one. So you can do it between yourselves, it's not an issue, or they sort of offer two routes, really. Option number one is that you come to some sort of, so one party will essentially go to CSA and apply down the route of CSA. What they will then do is that they will contact the other party and basically say, obviously you have a period where you can object to it. Like if they weren't your children, I suppose you probably wouldn't want to pay for them. I'm sorry, I hate that. I don't mean pay for them, but you know what I mean. Yeah. So basically, what will then happen after that is they will say, taking into your account your income and how many times you have the children overnight, this is what we recommend you supply for your the upbringing of your children, basically. And then what that takes into account is like food, general day-to-day bills, clothing, sports clubs. It literally takes everything into account. What you then have the option for is, and both parties can do, either the parties can do this, but option number one is that they will say, that's the amount. You have to then sort it between yourselves to sort of hand the finances over, if you like. Option two is where they'll step in and they'll remove it from a person's salary. So obviously,
so before you get the take home at the end of the month?
Yeah. So,
wow.
And you also will pick up, that person will also be charged as well on top. So for argument's sake, if they say, for argument's sake, it's £300 a month, they will then add on an extra 20, 25 quid, whatever it works out to be, just for them sort of implementing that financial agreement, I suppose.
I didn't know that they could do that.
Yeah. So what option one is, and this is what we do, is that I provide X amount a month, depending on, and it's salary dependent, and how many times you have the children overnight annually. So you can have the kids like day to day, and it won't impact how much that it will suggest you provide. It all comes down to how many you have, how often you have the children overnight per annum.
Feels like a complex math equation.
Yeah,
I know.
I'm getting
but
my head
also-
around it all.
yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Like, tell me how much I've got to divide, and
But it sounds crazy that it only counts overnight, because obviously you work, your work life is shifts. So, if you've got an evening shift, you might have them all day.
Yeah.
But that doesn't come into
no,
it.
absolutely irrelevant. So
wow.
yeah,
That's because you could do that sort of however many times a month, but that doesn't come into, you still have to pay as if you didn't have them that amount of time. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, essentially. So you could. The reality is, you could have your children 7 days a week, but if they're not overnight, then you'd still end up, if you went through the CSA route, you'd likely still end up providing X amount to wherever the children are, like housed overnight. I suppose is probably the right way to put it.
That just seems mad though, because in reality, I mean, kids are much more expensive during the day, surely. Do you know what I mean? At night time, they are hopefully sleeping.
Yeah, this is it.
Do you know what I mean?
That's when I apply for my loans at night.
That's a very good
mental.
point.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. It's very complex. It's so much more complex, and there's so much more to it than I could have ever envisaged for you, actually. I'm going to ask more personal question to you in regards to, with all this going on, how did you manage, how did you cope yourself with, obviously there was a breakdown in relationship, but you then suddenly, like you said, overnight, you're having this new setup and trying to work out this co-parenting, you're going through the process into court. I mean, that must have taken its toll on you, your well-being as well.
Yeah, I think so for me personally, how long ago was it that I worked in sport? It was probably around about 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
So with Jacob being 10, a lot of my time has been away from home, really. So I think you almost have this like natural, I'm not saying like, if I could have them every day, like, goes without saying, doesn't it? Like I would, but
Yeah.
I think like naturally I've had this like job lifestyle, whereby I was sort of away for like 4, 5, 6 days at a time, come back for like 1, 2 days, and then I'd be gone again. And even when I was like in and around the local area, I'd be working 12 hours and then doing an extra 2, 3 hours on top. And so the actual, for me personally, it wasn't as sort of hard hitting, really. I imagine if you were in a setup where, you worked like a 9 to 5 job, which was like a similar routine, and you'd get home, you put the kids to bed, and you had that. I imagine that would be a lot more difficult to stomach. So it wasn't as tough as I thought it was going to be.
You could adjust quite easily in regards to that kind of setup, isn't it? But what about kind of just the stress on you and how you felt about the whole situation of change?
I think again, I was fortunate with the support that I had around me. That's something that I've never sort of wanted for, really, throughout the whole process, I suppose. And I think like looking back, I've never really like reflected on that sort of period, I suppose, which whether that's quite sad or whether that's just the natural stiff upper lip thing and all that. But I think certainly, I think but in saying that, I'd probably discount the level of support I actually had around me, and probably have taken that for granted at times. Like obviously, as Laura's mentioned at the start, we've known each other for 32 years, and still wish I was a single child. but obviously, like Laura will, like you'll know, you know how it's all played out really over the course of the years. Um,
Yeah, of
and I
course.
think I think I think had I not have had the support network that I had in place, it'd probably be a much different story. But as I said, it's one of those, like I've never really reflected on it in its entirety. I suppose it's more just been about getting on with it, and because it's not, there's no manual.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's you know, it's the kids come first, don't they? So
Hmm.
What I was going to say is that, do you think that's an aspect of it, the fact that you haven't really had that time to reflect or really concentrate on how you were feeling with it because you had the boys to think about, and obviously they came first. So do you think that was an aspect of it?
yeah, I think so. I think you know you're trying to balance so many sort of spinning plates all at the same time,
Yeah.
and you know whether it's a change in dynamics of you know new relationships or you know new jobs or you know stress at work, which sort of takes your eye off it, or yeah, you know for whatever reason you're. I think I quite naturally do that anyway. I will focus my attention on something else if it's
Hmm.
um, you know going to be anything to do with like the emotional side of it really.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you're 5 6 years down the line, however long it's been, and actually it's just by that point it's just normality, I suppose. So it's
Yeah.
bizarre. It's a difficult one to explain without having. It's trying to explain it without having gone. It might sound like I'm really heartless, but it's
No.
I'm not. So
Yeah, right.
just for all the viewers out there, the boys I think struggled to begin with. I think, and I think in hindsight there was a lot of mistakes made on my behalf, really. Whether it was you know the introduction of new partner or you know as I've alluded to already, there's no manual, so you know you can think to yourself, oh, it's probably best that I don't you know mention who new partner is or who this person is. But as you'll both be fully aware with how young yours are, they are a lot more switched on than you probably give them credit for. Um,
Hmm.
and I
Yeah.
think there was a substantial period really whereby um, more so the eldest sort of really struggled because there was layers of um, confusion which had been created, I suppose, because I mean the reality is because just because there was no wholehearted honesty as to what the situation was,
Yeah.
and whether that was, you know, um, sort of the honesty between myself and the kids, or whether I was being sort of honest to myself, or you know, whatever the case may be, it's quite a difficult road to navigate with a how old would he have been then? Uh, six, yeah,
Six.
about
Yeah.
6 years old. So um, it's a difficult one to navigate because you're trying to sort of shelter them, I suppose, from adult issues,
Hmm.
um, but at the same time trying to give enough away that they begin to understand. And it was just yeah, it was just as I said in hindsight, those certainly that initial period, I but it probably wasn't handled particularly well by myself. But I think now, as time's gone on and sort of they've got older and they sort of understand more and more, and we've hit quite a nice sweet spot now where you know they're settled, they're happy, and we're just
And that's the main thing, isn't
yeah,
it?
this is it,
That is the main
absolutely,
thing.
absolutely. So
Well, that would go into my question. If you could do it over again, is there anything that you would do differently? And I think you've probably answered that just in the latter part,
yeah,
haven't you?
I think certainly in if I had to go through the process again, certainly I'd have been more honest with the kids from the off.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you've got to almost be cruel to be kind. So rather than just constantly thinking about, and I think it's a natural parenting thing, isn't it? It's the whole protect outside world, blah 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 blah. But I think certainly I'd have treated the situation with a little bit more of a sort of black and white approach, I suppose, and tried to have stayed on top of that really. So I think, hindsight, that's probably the one thing that I'd have I would have looked to have done differently, really. But as I said, there's no manual, so we live and learn.
So when did you notice that something had gone wrong with the communication? Sort of, what was there something that made you think, oh, this is when I now need to speak to him? And do you know what I mean? When was that breakdown moment? Was there a moment, or did you come to it naturally?
With the kids? Yeah. So I think and Laura, you'll remember this. I think we had a decline in behaviour, which was just all the classic signs. Really, he was fine at school. He was fine with mum and dad in general.
Yeah.
But he became quite angry is probably not the right word. He was just very he was very short, wasn't he? For a long time, but only really with myself, and I think that's, sort of like it's like any age, isn't it? You originally you put it down to just, oh, he's just getting older, or whatever, he had a bad day at school, or whatever the case may be, and then after it's been occurring for sort of a period of time, you start to reflect and look at it and go, I'm not entirely certain this is sort of like natural behaviour, really. So it's at that point, and I want to say it was probably around Christmas time when he was 7, maybe.
Yeah.
You kind of have to go, right, enough's enough. For whatever reason, something's not working. So you do all the reflective side of things and trying to understand what's going on. And from there, you just have to almost rebuild, really. Start having those open conversations. I think a lot of it was trying to, both of us, to try and understand our own emotions. And had some really good talks with my 7-year-old, which quite but as time went on, he became more and more aware, I think, and I think that was the issue. There was no awareness from his from his perspective as to what was actually going on, which, as I said, I'll hold my hands up. That was, I'll take that one on the chin from a learning point of view. And I think as time went on and he sort of started to understand more and more, that's when we saw him begin to settle down again. And he almost came across quite anxious. I think that's probably like the right word. Because I think he didn't feel like he could settle, because it was almost like he knew something was going on. He knew something had occurred, but he couldn't, because obviously, as I already said, it's an adult problem. His brain at the time just couldn't compute what the issue was, and so it was.
I think that's the best way you put it. He was just unsettled,
Yeah.
wasn't he? And just, I guess, like you said, because his world suddenly became a bit less stable, he just wasn't quite sure how to handle it, and that came across in his behaviour. But like I said, school he was okay, but when you think about it, it's because it's routine, it's safe. He knew exactly what to expect as soon as he walked through the door until he walked back out again. But I think it's really important to raise that as, sort of signs that, you may need to have these conversations with the children, or they may start, be starting to understand something that you think you've hidden really well to protect them. But like you said, sometimes we don't give them credit for being as intelligent as they are when they know something is
Yeah,
going on.
and it manifests. You always have to like constantly remind yourself that they are little human beings sometimes, and I think it will manifest itself in so many different ways. So as we said with with the eldest, he it was almost like he became quite anxious around everything and couldn't settle. But then you've got kids that will become very withdrawn, or and I think as time goes on, and you've got there's concerns now for me around if a child starts to become withdrawn, but you've got this whole new world, haven't you, of like Xbox, PlayStation, where they could be speaking to anyone, anywhere.
Yeah.
What are those conversations that are going on? Because unfortunately, the reality is that there are some not particularly nice people out there that will and can look to exploit those sort of emotional breakdown periods in children. So I just, for me, I think it's, again, if I was to reflect, there was probably multiple signs rather than just we noticed he was becoming quite anxious around certain things. And I think if you are going through this process and you sort of see any sort of changes, regardless of how small they might appear, sort of on their own, it's definitely worth keeping almost like a mental log of what you're seing, because as I said, it might be they've gone to bed early tonight, but because I did exactly the same. He's obviously had a bad day at school, and then the next time it happens, it's almost like you've forgotten about that first time, so you go, he's obviously just had a bad day at school. So it is definitely worth noting these things, because I think it's easy to play it down as classic childhood issues, but actually the issue might be a little bit more deep seated than you like to believe, really.
So taking into account obviously the whole process, everything we've sort of discussed, if you could give one piece of advice to a parent about to go through this, or currently going through sort of the co-parenting situation, what would it be?
Patience is the key. So, and I don't just mean because it's going to take like best part of 18 months to although it will help. But actually, what might seem dire straits at the moment will generally work out okay. And I think as I've said, what the court system provided me was a platform to then converse and have a look at the general setup, really, with the knowledge that actually if it doesn't work out for whatever reason, then you've still got this in place. So so like for me, so if we take for instance like Christmas Day, Christmas Day is really important to like the kids' mum, always has been. For me, it's just another day. I can take it or leave it.
You're such a bloke on that. Connor is just the same.
But I think it's because with the nature of your jobs and stuff in the past, it's because you've worked most Christmas Day. So for you, it is
exactly
another day.
So, and what was actually mandated was that it would be alternative Christmas days, and that was it, really. And for me, I'm not about to essentially rip my children out of their home because I have it in writing that I can. Actually, it's the right place for them to be on Christmas Day. It's the right place for their mum on Christmas Day. And actually, I can just have them on Boxing Day. So, but it was like little things like that which actually meant that we could then start to to talk and really open up the conversation, and that's all come about because of being patient with and trusting the process, really. So yeah, I think that's probably the
No, that's really good. And as you said, you've come to a point now where the kids are happy, they're settled, you're in a good place with the mum, and a functional relationship. That's all you want, isn't it? The best for
absolutely
kids. That's what it's about.
Absolutely.
And I genuinely don't think I've seen them as happy and settled as they are at the moment, and I think that is down to you and their mum, like you said, opening up that conversation. And actually, now you've got the court agreement in place, you can have the conversations where you're doing not only what's best for them, but what's best for you guys as
absolutely.
well. And that seems to have really sort of worked for you, for her, but also for them. And I think that, that's credit to you guys as well, really, because they're both really, really settled at the moment, and they are great kids. I know I'm biased.
They are
great kids.
They are.
But no, we really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about this, because we know obviously it is personal. It's a difficult topic. There's a lot to it, as we now know. But no, we really appreciate it, because we know that if we've got any listeners that are going through this or potentially might be going through this, that it'll be really, really helpful for them. So
yes.
Thank you so much for...
absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Speak to you soon, guys.